Okay, so this is our first weekly theme. And as I just mentioned in a group, these are going to be one offs in a sense. And they're also going to be related to core themes within the course. So we kind of go in a cycle. So this first weekly theme is going to be related to the polycrisis. And then in our session on Monday, we'll both dive back into the first lesson in a cursory way and talk about this kind of expanded take on it. I hope that makes sense. So where I want to get to is this idea that, you know, in a lot of ways, this whole program is about, I don't want to say having a bigger impact, but making a sustainable, meaningful contribution to the world in a way that does good and feels good, and finding that balance. In large part by letting go of striving to be great. That's the difference between the hero and the anti-hero. Hero strives for greatness, anti-hero strives for goodness. And for a course and program that's all about social impact, we haven't actually talked that much about a meaningful theory of change, especially in the context of the polycrisis. One of the first lessons is about how dense and knotty and complex and kind of impossible this is. None of us actually has the power to make a significant, like, life-saving impact, um, or world-changing, I should say. And so, what do we do? And I want to get into that idea. There's not going to be any silver bullet solutions here, but I do want to address that meaningfully, so it doesn't feel like a cop out. Most of the program is about how we build our lives and the systems of our lives so that we have the energy and clarity to go do something. But I also want to get into kind of some sort of rigor into the theory of change, although you might use rigor somewhat lightly. Hello, kitty. So, um, here's the main idea here, that the polycrisis is at its core a failure of the heart, not the head. And one of the features of modern society, and I don't want to get into this frame of like modern is bad, pre-modern is good, or whatever some people do. But the way we tend to look at the world, in the West in 2026 is often largely through a uh, technical um, technical lens, and so an engineering lens. And so we think like, what do we do about the polycrisis? We're looking for different technologies or ways of organizing things like that. And my first premise is that we basically already know what we need to do in terms of like tangible actions for the most part. We have the clean energy technology. Fusion would be great. People are working on that. But generally speaking, and we have, good organization, democratic organizational models. We have good voting models. We have ways of delivering healthcare to people. We have ways of getting people out of chronic poverty. um, we kind of know how to solve a lot of these problems. Um, and the problem is that we're also kind of addicted to, you might say, um, money and dopamine and other kind of things that take us out of doing what's actually good for us in the long term. You might say that we're kind of all like short-term focused to the detriment of our long-term health and safety and well-being and so forth. And so the basic idea I want to put out here is it can be really tempting in the face of looking at the polycrisis to want to do something really big and ambitious and kind of mind-blowing. In one of the lessons, I called this the dreamer. We get this um, really outsized version of what we can do. And it also is sometimes quite technical, about like fixing it all. And, you know, I don't want to say that's wrong or that's bad. I think it often can be a distraction. But the point is that for the polycrisis, one of the best things any of us can do is simply to create networks of support. And so, one of the defining aspects of modern society is it's more and more atomized. Yes, we can are connected around the globe and all these things, and in practice we're more and more self-reliant. We're out of community. We're out of connection, um, and that leads to diseases of despair and all sorts of problems. It also is just like makes it difficult to distribute care and support and resources where they're needed. And so, where the hero is kind of this single being that's trying to save the world, the operating model here is like what actually saves the world is the ecosystem of change, the network of support, and that as purpose driven leaders or change agents, the goal is not to save the dragon, it's to grow the ecosystem of change or the network of support. And so, simply by being in community with people, by having friendships, um, by being connected, by being friendly in a way, we're creating avenues through which we can distribute resources and care where they need to go. And I'd I'd like to submit that that might be the most powerful thing any of us can do. None of us are going to save the world on our own. Um, but we can combat some of the fundamentals of the problem by building these webs of support, connections among humans where we can share money, ideas, clothing, food, but also just have a feeling of togetherness and like really building the ecosystem of change and moving the core subject from like the self as the hero to the collective as a unit of change. So that was perhaps not my most pithy, succinct way of saying that, but I hope it gives us some fodder um, for talking about this more. Okay, bye.